3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome everyone to our first virtual event of 2021. My name is Nuria Luguera and I'm the Vice President of the Spanish Irish Business Network. We have participants from Dublin, Madrid and Dún Laoghaire, of course, and I would like to thank you all for being here with us today. To those of you who don't know the Spanish Irish Business Network, let me explain that it's a non-profit organization and we work for promoting business and cultural links between Ireland and Spain. Currently, the scene has more than 1,000 members coming from multiple sectors such as industrial, banking, financing, construction, education, food and beverage, legal, media, retail, and technology. If you would like to know more about the scene and our activities, please come and visit our website. I would also like to say a big thank you to our speakers today, John O'Connor from the Housing Agency and John Collerman, who will be joining in a few minutes, for taking the time to share their works with us today. Both the Housing Agency and the Land Development Agency are key players in delivering housing in Ireland, and we'll know more about their initiatives in a few moments. But before we start, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Embassy of Ireland to Spain for their continued support to the scene. And we are extremely fortunate for having the Ambassador Cilla Maguire here with us today. So I will hand over to you, Ambassador.
Nuria, thank you very much, and thank you to you in particular and to the wider SIBN membership for inviting me to speak. Really, the honour is mine, and I'm delighted to be able to participate as well on this session. You know, I remember when I came here first a few years ago, chatting with the then President and Vice President of SIBN and talking about the type of things that interested us, and the sustainability goals, development goals, the SDGs, that whole space of equality was something that we talked about at that space. And I'm really glad to see this event. You know, I'm delighted to be sharing the panel with the two Johns. I see John O'Connor on the screen at the moment, and I think John Coleman is to join as well. You know, when we talk about the Agenda 2030, understandably, we think a lot and talk a lot about the big global issues, the tackling the impact of climate change, mitigating that. We talk about equality, gender equality and diversity in all its respects. We talk about, you know, poverty and the unacceptability of the numbers of people who are hungry in the world. But of course, you know, the thing about the Agenda 2030 is that it starts smaller than that. It starts in our homes, it starts in our communities, in our cities. You mentioned Dublin and Dún Laoghaire, two places I'm longing to see that I haven't seen for a year now. But we talk about that and about, you know, building up out of that. And, you know, I think it's really great to have this opportunity to talk about housing in that space as a rights issue, as an equality issue. And just to say that, you know, from the perspective of the Irish government, if people ever wonder what is in the in-tray of the Taoiseach or what is in the in-tray of the senior civil servants in the departments of finance and the departments of the Taoiseach's department, when they're not dealing with the pandemic that we're dealing with, you know, housing is right up there as an issue. So I'm very thankful that the two Johns are able to take time out of their day. I'm also delighted, I would just say as a final remark, that John O'Connor is, as I called him, a DFA dad. His daughter Isabel is one of our colleagues, one of our friends in our embassy in London. So thank you again, Nuria. Muchísimas gracias for inviting me to say these few words and for having this initiative today. I'll turn off my video to save power. Thank you.
So
bye.
Much. Thank you. We'll start now with the event. As you know, in September 2015, world leaders adopted a set of sustainable development goals. And there is an urgent need for European administrations to commit to adopting sustainable and long-term and inclusive solutions in line with the 2030 agendas SDH to provide adequate, secure and affordable housing. Now, the scarcity of affordable housing is a serious problem growing across Europe. housing is in short supply and in both Ireland and Spain, despite increasing demand. And the scarcity of housing pushes up rents, causing many to be gradually priced out of certain urban locations and forced to accept substandard quality homes. The lack of a definition of affordable housing poses many challenges. Housing systems in Europe are quite diverse, and the term affordable is interpreted in different ways. Now, for the purpose of this talk, we could say that affordable housing can be defined as when a household can afford to pay initial costs, rent, and other related costs such as utility bill and charges on a long-term basis, while still being able to maintain a minimum standard of living. Now, housing is usually the largest share of households' budget. All European governments are launching initiatives to support finance-assisted housing for middle incomes, such as in Spain. And in Spain, the autonomous communities implement their own housing policies. We have two terms for social and affordable housings. We will know social housing as officially protected housing, VPO, and affordable housing as publicly protected housing. Now, these terms refers to subsidized housing for home ownership, but also to rent with the option to buy. Now, in Spain, the Spanish model, as the Irish one, is a model based on home ownership, with about 85% of households owning their properties. Now, this explains why affordable rental housing make up less than 5% across the entire market in Spain. The City Council of Madrid has launched a new initiative to encourage owners to put units back in the market. These houses have previously been left off the market due to being used as short-term rental units, such as Airbnb, that now are empty due to the pandemic. In terms of thresholds, to apply for what we would understand for affordable housing, the conditions are to have been living in Madrid for 5 years and a salary range between 32,000 and 88,000, which is the equivalent to 3 to 7.5 times the minimum wage. Now, according to the Council of Madrid, the maximum subsidy would be 900 per month, and rent cannot make up more than 30% of annual income. The council will subsidize the rent for up to 4 years and will also pay any necessary maintenance costs. Now, while this initiative shows a positive shift towards affordable housing, it's still a minor contribution to the small affordable rental housing sector in Spain, and it also raises the questions about how to ensure long-term affordability of housing. Now, last year, the Irish government launched the cost rental model, an initiative that is intended to deliver long-term affordable housing. And I will now like to hand over to John O'Connor, who will give us more details on this model. John, please.
Thank you very much, Nuria, and thank you for the invitation to speak here this evening. Good evening, Ambassador. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of affordable rental in Ireland and what's happening, and then specifically, as Nuria mentioned, cost rental. So I'll share a presentation with you. Can everyone, you can see that presentation there?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yes.
Just to tell me if it isn't coming across correctly. You're seeing the full screen. I'm just going to speak about affordable rental and cost rental homes. So firstly, in terms of how can we provide affordable rental homes on a large scale, and that's what we want to do both in Ireland, and I think it's an issue also in Spain in terms of how can we provide affordable rental homes. Before I go into that, I just want to give you an overview of the housing agency. The housing agency is a government agency working with and supporting municipalities throughout Ireland. It's a national organisation. Housing associations, they're non-for-profit housing providers. We support the Department of Housing, local government and heritage. And we support and work with other organisations such as the Land Development Agency, which John Coleman here is from, the Housing Finance Agency, and we work with the private sector in relation to delivering housing and housing services. And we provide quite a range of services. These are just some of the services the housing agency work on. One, we support housing policy development and its implementation. That's mainly working with the department in terms of that policy development, and then very much working on the implementation of that. We work with the municipalities there, the local authorities in Ireland, the housing associations, again, on the provision of housing and services. We provide various central national services, for example, in terms of assessing the funding applications from housing associations to deliver housing. We are going to provide equity loans to housing associations to provide affordable rental, cost rental homes. We acquire properties nationally on behalf of municipalities and housing associations. We provide an amount of land and we provide housing research and analysis. And these are just some of our recent publications issued by the housing agency. And then one publication that we've issued just earlier this month is Social, Affordable and Cooperative Housing in Europe. So we took a number of countries and examples of housing developments in those countries and the plans for those developments. This publication is available on the housing agency website. It is also, we could have hard copies, so we can provide a good number of copies to Nuria or anybody who wants copies of that publication. We'll send them out to you. And I understand that you supported, as part of your fundraising, the Peter McVerry Trust, a homeless organisation working in Ireland. The housing agency provides a lot of support to the various homeless organisations and the non-profit organisations supporting homeless. So specifically in relation to Peter McVerry, we've provided them with a number of apartment buildings and other buildings for their services. So this is one apartment building in the city centre that we provided to Peter McVerry Trust the year before last. And another example is this smaller apartment building that was in state ownership that we refurbished again and provided to Peter McVerry Trust, again targeted at bringing families and individuals out of homelessness. And then we also provide source housing that is passed on to Peter McVerry Trust and other organisations on a national basis. Now coming to cost rental and affordable rental, and when I speak about cost rental, the rent is based on the cost of provision and the cost of maintenance. So it's not related to market rents, but it's about the rent being based on the cost of building the housing and maintaining the housing. The one thing that happens is over time, the rents come down relative to income and can be very significantly reduced as the loans are repaid. And that's the way it has worked in many countries. Some examples being Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark, where they have built up a very significant cost rental sector, and the rents initially, but even over time, become more affordable. And the overall objective for cost rental is to provide affordable rental homes to moderate, and medium income households. I won't go into this in detail, but when one is looking at providing affordable rental homes or affordable housing, it's those middle income groups that are being targeted. If a household has sufficient income, they can afford to rent or purchase on the open market. Households are on a very low income would get social housing support, and it's to help those households in the middle that need some support and assistance to afford to rent or buy. And just a couple of items in terms of affordable and providing affordable housing. Nuria mentioned there 30% of income. And when you're providing affordable housing, I think it's very important to look at two items in particular. One is the cost at the time of entry. This is really important in getting that down as a 30% or below a household's income. But also it's important to look at the long-term cost, because you want it to becoming more affordable over time. A household cannot sustain paying 30% of their income on housing over their lifetime. So it's important that those costs reduced over time. And in terms of when looking at affordable housing, is looking at what is the best use of government funding in terms of providing affordable housing, and what is the cost to the household, to the consumer. And then we want a system that's fair and equitable for all society. In terms of measures that have been used around the world, in terms of providing affordability, one is the use of state lands, land owned by municipalities or local authorities, and providing that at low cost. So that is one significant measure. Funding towards infrastructure, roads and drainage by government and municipalities to reduce costs. Long-term financing, and I'll come back to that, long-term low-cost financing makes a big difference. The provision of secondary loans has been used very successfully in many countries. Taxation measures and planning gain. This would be in development plans where a percentage of private housing has to be provided as affordable housing. And I understand that's the situation in Spain, and currently in Ireland, 10% of all private development has to be provided for social housing. And I would say mind the gap. Providing affordable housing always costs money, and it's just how do you cover that gap. And I want to show you just one example from Ireland. There's a development in Stepaside, Enniskerry Road. It's in Dún Laoghaire. And Nuria was one of the main drivers with our colleagues in Dún Laoghaire, Rathdown County Council in making this happen, and one of the first cost rental developments in the country. So the particular development is in Dublin. It's in South Dublin, in an area called Stepaside. So that's just to give you a location of the particular development. And this is well under development at this stage. See, Nuria and her colleagues in Dún Laoghaire Rathdown kind of drove this project in terms of it was designed on behalf of Dún Laoghaire, and I'll come to it in terms of who they worked with and collaborated with in terms of delivering this development. It's very well located in terms of services and schools, close to a light rail, close to a public park. So it's a very well located development. It's a development of 155 houses and apartments, and 50 of those will be cost rental. And it was a collaboration between Dún Laoghaire Rathdown County Council, who kind of drove this project from the start. They entered into agreements with 2 housing associations to actually deliver the project to and respond. And the housing agency worked as well on the project in terms of provision of land and the contractual arrangements that are in place. So it's say the first kind of pure cost rental development in the country. And again, just coming back to cost rental or affordable rental, if you want to use that term, the rents are based on the cost of provision, the cost of management maintenance, and then future costs, which might be window replacements or other future costs that have to be provided for. The specific initiative that has been introduced by the Irish government and expected to be expanded very significantly over the next number of years was the provision of secondary loans called cost rental equity loans to support the delivery of cost rental housing. So delivery in the main would be by the housing associations. We call them approved housing bodies, but the housing association, non-profit organizations here. For this year, for 2021, there's 35 million of these secondary loans, and this would be work with senior debt of over 100 million to provide housing. The fund would fund 30% of the cost of delivery. It has a 40-year term at 1%, and there's no repayment during that term, and there's a second charge on the property. The Housing Finance Agency and other lenders will provide the senior debt, and the Housing Finance Agency specifically providing debt over 40 years. And that long-term kind of finance is very important. And a typical development now that's going to be delivered this year, and there'll be, I think, quite a number of developments around the country, would have a primary loan from the Housing Finance Agency at 1.5% interest. So the first 30 years of that loan will be fixed at that interest rate. The second loan, secondary loan, will be 1%, an interest rate of 1%. And then the Housing Association would provide some equity into that development as well. I won't go into this, but just in terms of the rents are based on the cost of servicing the debt, management, maintenance, and as the debt is paid off, the rents can be reduced because the paying of the debt will not be increasing over time. And I've just taken this example. This is the Enniskerry Road example. I have did a cost adjustment factor just to relate it better to, in some way, to Spain and to Madrid in terms of the types of costs and rents. So initially in year one, the rents would be 720 euro per month, and then they'd gradually increase over time. And they could be kept fairly flat because it's really only the management and maintenance costs that should be increasing the costing and increasing the rents. And over time, the rents relative to market would become more affordable. But the main thing is really, it's not about market rents, it's about whether households can afford these rents and to make them as affordable as possible. That's just a quick example. And then just to conclude, in terms of challenges in terms of providing cost rental in Ireland, and a lot of these would also apply in other countries and a number of them in Spain, is one, Ireland, we're a small open economy and we have to respond rapidly to changing conditions. And housing is a much slower process in terms of developing, delivering housing takes much longer. The emphasis in Ireland, again, as it is in Spain, has been on home ownership. And often kind of rental hasn't had enough attention or enough support. The great advantages of rental housing is that they're more flexible and adaptable to household circumstances. And it provides for a much more efficient use of housing stock, in that households utilize housing that's more appropriate to their needs. Rental housing is critical in our cities and our large urban areas. And we need to have affordable rental housing, as with affordable purchase housing, in order to have, you know, a vibrant city and be able to deliver the services in those cities. And the other major thing in terms of housing, and this applies across the world, housing supply never responds as fast as policymakers would like. So housing takes time, and if we want to build up a big affordable rental sector, a cross rental sector, that takes decades to do. So long-term housing policies are critical, and that they survive from government to government. So the countries that have been very successful in having affordable rental housing at, you know, affordable rents have been, you know, the Northern European countries, the likes of, in addition to the Netherlands, Denmark, Austria, and it's over 40, 50 years that they've built up this very significant stock of affordable housing. And I think that's what we need to look to as well, is to build up a major sector over decades. Thank you very much. So that's a very brief overview of cost rental and affordable housing, and just some of what's happening in Ireland at the moment. I'll stop sharing there now.
Thank you, John. I'm thrilled to see Enniskerry. This is going so well. We'll talk about that later as well.
Yeah, as I said, Nuria had a huge impact on that in terms of driving it along.
Well, it was a team effort. We'll talk about that later as well, about collaboration. As we are seeing, the provision of housing it's a very complex problem. I mean, there are many barriers, such as the cost of construction, the availability and cost of funding, the price of land, the availability of some service lands. John highlighted one of the key issues, which is the period of imbalance between supply and demand, which is typical from real estate sector. So in a typical development, the time from inception to handover could take usually between 3 and 3.5 years, but that's assuming that this land is serviced. When the land is not serviced and you have to assembling land, holding, securing services and plannings, it could take something between 8 to 10 years. So the overall time could take something between 11 and 14 years, which is a long period between demand and supply. So in Spain, the cost of provision of providing infrastructure is borne by developers via the development levy system. The problem here is that because we have so many administrations and different levels, with more than 8,000 administrations, the coordinations between all the administrations is difficult, and sometimes the infrastructure is not delivered at the pace it should be. Planning could be a whole typical debate that we talk about that in another date, but even if sites are already zoned for development, there are still some blockages in relation to infrastructure. In the case of Dublin, there are deficiency in the water supply and sewage treatment capacity, and that's particularly critical. And that's when the Land Development Agency come in place. It was established in 2018, I think. John will talk more about that. So I will hand over to you, John, to give us some details on the work that the LDA is doing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nuria. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, attendees, for listening to me today. So I will try and share my screen to give you a brief overview of the Land Development Agency firstly, but then secondly, just some views that we have around affordable housing, linking into some of the material that John O'Connor presented to you there. So that's what I'll talk about. I hope you can see that okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I'll give you a bit of background about the Land Development Agency. It's a relatively novel concept. We were formed in late 2018, and we've been kind of building from scratch an operational base since then. So what is the Land Development Agency? It's kind of, the clue is in the name. We're focused on trying to make development happen on land where and when it should be happening, but with a particular focus on state lands. So that's to try and get land that is owned by the government, that is try to work with municipalities to develop their land, particularly larger sites, and to get homes developed on them with a special focus on affordable homes, which is a critical area for Ireland at the moment, as John O'Connor alluded to as well. So there's a kind of a near-term focus on making delivery of homes happen as quickly as possible. There's a longer-term focus, as Nuria pointed to as well, on more strategic land assembly and strategic land management. So what does that mean? It's kind of broader transformational areas within our cities that, if they were pulled together in a coherent way, and if things like, as Nuria said again, infrastructure and other things were sorted out, were dealt with by bringing together landowners in collaboration, some of which may be state lands, that we could have a more coherent development of our cities, rather than piecemeal small sites being developed individually with a kind of a better plan. And I'll explain more what I mean about that. So we have accessed some state land. This gives you a sense of our current portfolio, which is divided between development sites and more strategic sites. So development is nearer term, strategic would be longer term. But we would hope on the strategic sites to get some development happening in the short term as well, to give them a bit of momentum. So on the initial sites, we have a portfolio of sites which can yield around 4,000 homes. We're trying to grow that to about 10,000 worth of land in 2021. And we will have construction starting in 2021. The map here gives you a sense of where the sites are located. Many of them are located near Dublin, which is to the right-hand side, which is to the east of the country, which is where a lot of the population is and where a lot of demand is. But we are keen, especially on the strategic areas, to push more towards the non-Dublin cities, the regional cities like Cork, Limerick, Galway and Waterford, to try and take some of the pressure away from Dublin and to grow the regional cities to their potential a bit more. So that's why you see a focus of near term in Dublin, longer term in the regional cities. So if you look at 9, 10 and 11 particularly, Cork Docklands, Limerick train station and Galway City are some of the larger, more transformational projects that we hope will play a role in growing the scale of those cities. So one of our short-term projects, just to give you a sense of the type of situation that we're getting ourselves into, we hope the top picture is before, the bottom picture we hope will be after pretty soon. So it's a former mental health institution in Cork City. It's well known in Cork City, which is Ireland's second largest city. It's been a bit of an eyesore on the horizon of the city for many, many years. The institution burned down, it was set on fire a few years ago and has been rotting ever since. So it's been sitting there for a long, long time with nothing happening to it. So the LDA was able to obtain the site from the Health Service and has just lodged a planning application consent, which we hope we will get approved in the next few months, and we'll be able to start building 274 homes. Again, the focus is on affordable homes, and in fact, the LDA will be required by its legislation, by law, to focus on the delivery of affordable homes and social homes from state lands. Another one that I have to mention, and Nuria is actually very famous for affordable housing in Ireland, because I recall when we had just set up the Land Development Agency, Nuria approached me and spoke to me about this project, which is Shangana in South Dublin, quite close to the Enniskerry Road scheme in Stepaside that John O'Connor mentioned. But this is owned by the former employer of Nuria, Dún Laoghaire Rathdown County Council, the local municipality. There's 597 homes that we've worked with Dún Laoghaire to get planning approval for. We now have approval for them. They're going to be a mixture of social, of cost rental, and for sale homes, but all of them either social and affordable. So the deal is the municipality provides the land, the LDA finances and project manages the construction and the cost rental homes. So that's the opportunity there. So not only was Nuria involved in this one, but also John O'Connor's one as well. So,
yeah,
these are the two big affordable.
yeah, it was great to work in both schemes.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. So that's what we've been doing with all our sites. This just gives you a flavor of other things that we're doing. They're artist and graphical impressions of the planning applications and architectural designs that we have lodged in many cases or will be lodging to get planning consents in the very near future. For the longer term sites, we want to bring together big sites, larger strategic areas, to master plan or provide a planning framework to collaborate with municipalities to bring together landowners and have one cohesive planned zone or transformational quarter within cities that can significantly contribute to their growth. This has been absent in many respects from Ireland for many years. We do have planning schemes that call strategic development zones, but no one ever stepped in to make the implementation happen. So that's really what the LDA is here to do. We've already started on 4 of them. The top left is in the second city in Ireland, Cork's main Docklands area. So in common with some other European cities, we're working with Cork City Municipality to get the docks redesigned and redeveloped. The top right is Limerick City main train station, where we worked again with local authorities to develop a design review for that area, and we hope to bring forward a master plan which will be put into law in the next number of months. At the bottom left is another one in Galway, and at the bottom right is an emerging one in Dublin that we're working on at the moment. So within 2 years, we've already got a number of these up and running, and these could yield anything from 1,000 homes to 20,000 homes over the long term. So the small one might be, the Galway one, where the large one might be Cork City Council in the Docklands. So just a bit more detail, it's the central train station in Limerick. It's 50 hectares of land. It's mainly owned by state bodies, the health service, the rail company, the municipality. So we have stepped in to work with the landowners to put together a master plan and to provide a framework to develop the area in the future. We're also looking at individual development opportunities that might happen in the near term. Again, affordability is going to be a big focus. We started it by bringing together a group of architects to provide a vision for Limerick, and the vision has now been translated into a master plan, and we hope to translate the master plan into real development in the next couple of years. So some of the imagery is presented there, and given it's a train station, it focuses on presenting a new gateway into the city. We've taken inspiration for some of this from European comparables. So the BN Haven in North Haven, Copenhagen, is a current example, and perhaps one that's a bit more advanced but not complete is Hafen City in Hamburg. This again is where the state stepped in. In most cases, the state owned all the land and put together a development plan to coherently bring forward in a proper framework large-scale transformational projects. So how do we work out where we target all the government lands? We've been working for the past 2 years on putting together a state land database. Up until now, there has been no centralized, coherent way to understand what does the state own. So what does the health service own? What does the army own? What does the municipalities own? So we've mapped all of these. We're putting them together. We will develop an insights report to show exactly who owns what and what could be developed. And we, by law, will be required to report to the government within 1 year of the Land Development Agency legislation being enacted, a report on state lands to show what they could be used for, with a focus, of course, on housing. So when I think about the LDA, of course, we need to deliver homes in the near term. That's in the green area, and a lot of our money and time and effort will be spent on that in the early years. But I think as time goes on, we're going to spend more and more of our time and our resources and money on the strategic land piece that I mentioned. So just moving on to the affordability piece, which is what we're all here to talk about. And I'll talk about some of the key issues that present themselves from the LDA perspective and how we intend to try and help deliver them. It's worth noting that while John O'Connor from the Housing Agency provided many of the examples of policy, and a lot of the policy work that he has been central in formulating and working on. And he mentioned some of the approved housing bodies that we have, the not-for-profit bodies that provide social and affordable housing. We would see, and John would see, the LDA as being another implementation body, implementation vehicle to deliver on this policy. So just a high level on rental costs. Rents are pretty expensive in Ireland, especially Dublin. You will see from 2008, they obviously crashed in line with the wider global financial crisis, but they've increased very, very heavily since then. A lot of the problems was similar to Spain. There was nothing built for many years. We had NAMA, you guys had Sareb, quite similar, and it blocked a lot of development for many years because it was all about trying to get money back. It wasn't about investing in planning, investing in infrastructure. So as a result, we have a housing shortage because we had a black hole in housing production for many years after 2008. And with the result now that rents have increased, and a Dublin household at the median, that's right in the middle, could be paying up to 47% of their disposable income on rent, which is far, far, far too high. So this doesn't show too many signs of abating. There's many blockages in getting delivery going. So we produced a lot of houses at one point. We don't produce nearly enough now. And there's a number of reasons for that. But 23% of developments with planning consents in the major cities have only commenced as at the end of the year. So there's a lot of planning consents, but not much building happening. So we're trying to find a way to make some of that building happen, especially using state land. On the supply side, I mentioned that the supply was massive, way too big. The average for Ireland should be about 30 to 35,000 homes per annum. We produced 90,000 back in 2006, which is way too much. And clearly you could see the effect of the crash. A lot of construction workers emigrated. Our construction sector has struggled to recover ever since then. And that has resulted in high costs, which I'll outline now in a moment. We do have a growing population. And I presume that will continue in a post-COVID world with inward migration. But we are not producing nearly enough homes to meet the needs of the population. Hence, affordability is getting worse. As well as that, densification is also a problem for Ireland. If you look at the dwelling types that are throughout Europe and compared to Ireland, we have an issue with apartment living. It's a social, cultural issue, but also we seem to have a problem in getting significant apartment construction going. So we're very low down the ladder when you look at the amount of apartments that we can develop in comparison to houses. But the national policy dictates that we should be mainly delivering apartments to densify our cities. So that's another conundrum that needs to be unlocked. But one big thing, especially for an agency that has to deliver homes, is the costs of delivery are very, very big. And we had discussions with Nuria during the week about hard construction costs in Spain. And I was amazed to see how low they were in comparison to Ireland. And I observed that our job would be much easier if we had those. But the Society of Chartered Surveyors in Ireland has just released a report on construction costs. So the hard costs, excluding land, excluding certain taxes, excluding any developer's profit. We don't want profit, but the market wants profit. And other costs, the bare hard construction costs could be as much as at the higher end, approaching 300,000, but on average 220, 230, 240,000. That does not equal affordable homes. That's very hard to make them affordable to people. So how is the state responding to that? It's come with two emerging policy recommendations. John O'Connor has touched on these or discussed these in detail, so I will only touch on them. But it's affordable purchase, where the home will be sold to the household at market value, but the municipality or the producer, say if it's the Land Development Agency, retains a minority share. So it's affordable to the household to purchase. So that's one route. Another route is cost rental, where the rents are going to be based on the cost of production of the homes, which will hopefully result in affordable homes. So that's they're the two main aims. I won't go into them further as John has dealt with them much better than I could. So who are we targeting? It's the middle income of households. So I've set out what the average monthly net income for households in Ireland is by decile of population. So the bottom 10% are the first decile, the top 10% are the 10th decile. And we're really targeting those people that do not qualify for social housing. So in Ireland, you qualify for everything or nothing. And that also we are trying to, we don't want to target the people that can afford their own costs of homes. So we're targeting the people in the middle that don't qualify for social housing, struggle to afford private housing. Those are the people that we want to hit. We think that and it's probably small in Spanish numbers, but it's very large in Irish numbers. There's about 120,000 households, which comprise about 350,000 people that would need an affordable rental home. Those are people that currently rent in urban areas in Ireland that are in those income deciles. So it's quite a big target market. We've a long way to go to provide homes for all of these people as a sector in the country. So how might that look? What we would like to do, and to help with that situation, is to gather together the state lands that I mentioned, to do more deals with Nuria and her former colleagues on the local authorities and the municipalities. We may buy land in the future or partner with others. We would funnel that into affordable homes. We would provide funding from the 1.25 billion euros that has been allocated to us, which we can provide additional debt on top of that to give us a total spending power of 2.5 billion. And we would provide cost rental homes and affordable purchase homes, as well as social homes for people to occupy. So what's the vision? It would be nice to think, I think, that sometime in 2021 or maybe beyond, that someone could go to a government website, maybe it's the LDA, maybe it's the housing agency, maybe it's our not-for-profits, or maybe it's all of us together to see where are the affordable homes coming on stream, where can we buy, where can we register interest, and at least give them some sort of hope and visibility on the affordability of their housing getting better. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting to see not only the short-term solutions, but also the long-term strategy, which is the key to solving this problem, isn't it? So we jump now to the questions, but we don't have much time. So I will ask you a few questions to each of you, and then Brendan can manage questions from all attendees, if that's okay. So John O'Connor, Enniskerry. The cost rental project for Enniskerry was particularly difficult in all fronts, in planning, legal, finance, and everything. Now, it was a successful project, in part because of the leadership of the SEO, Ms. Hegarty, and the knowledge of our DLR solicitor, Imar O'Doherty, but not all local authorities have that level of expertise within their teams. What advice would you give to those local authorities?
Maria, first, I think we need to build up expertise in terms of how we provide cost rental and affordable rental in Ireland, specifically for local authorities that haven't got the expertise. One, utilise the housing agency, and we've built up an affordable housing team, and then also link in to the local authorities like Dunleary, Down, who have done it, and utilise their expertise. So I think it's use the experience of those who have done it is very important.
Yes, and that brings me to the second question, which is about collaboration. I mean, Enniskerry was possible because of the collaboration, as you mentioned, with Respond to the Housing Agency and Dunleary County Council. So now the government has opted strongly for the production of affordable housing that is built by housing associations. What value can the housing associations bring to the provision of affordable housing?
In Ireland, the local authorities, as you know, they're the housing authorities. So the municipalities are the housing authorities. As important that remains in terms of who can avail of social housing or affordable rental or affordable purchase housing. The one big advantage of the approved housing body, the housing associations, is it's their business. Housing is their business, and they're specialists in it. So they have a lot to offer in terms of delivering particularly affordable rental housing. They're less interested in affordable purchase because their business is kind of long-term kind of rental. But I think it's critically important that there is that collaboration, with the local authorities, and collaboration makes things work.
Absolutely. And as you said, housing associations not only build, but also manage and operate and provide services for, so it's not only the housing issue, it's around everything, isn't it? Now, John Coleman, sustainable buildings and low zero carbon homes would produce fewer carbon emissions, as we know. How is the LDA encouraging innovation in housing design, master planning and construction?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Nuria, because we had a change of government, as you'll know, last year, and the Land Development Agency featured in the kind of the strategy for government, which was put together as it was being formed, and called the Programme for Government, and that heavily emphasised innovation and sustainability in our construction sector, and for the LDA to contribute towards that. So that's something that's very important to us. We want to provide for that in a number of ways. Obviously, you'll know from Shangana, we like to build them in an energy efficient way, which is not so important perhaps in Spain. It's a warmer climate, but certainly it is important in Ireland, especially important in Ireland. So Shangana is designed to passive standards. So that's one way. We do want to come up with other ways as well. We think there's considerable scope for productivity increases in Irish construction as well. You've seen the costs, which are pretty challenging to deliver any sort of affordability in Ireland. We want to innovate and perhaps use, I think there's an opportunity where the LDA is not profit driven, to use the LDA for innovation and to bring new methods and new ways of doing things, and to foster that. Say, for instance, offsite construction, and maybe the LDA can provide or contribute towards providing some visibility of scale that would encourage the use of offsite production and the creation of facilities, which is challenging in a small jurisdiction like Ireland to get to that critical mass of scale. In a general sense, as we're 2 years old now, and as we mature, we're working on putting in place not just lip service around we support sustainability, but also we are developing policies in relation to the design standards that we set our design teams that we appoint for each scheme, to make sure that they're covering really important things like sustainability, and that's what we're going to develop more as we go along.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, is to embed sustainability in the design from the master planning level, not later, which cannot be done. And that's a key thing, not just to deliver housing, is to deliver sustainable housing, so it can work in the long term, let's say. And just my final question about Sangana. Sangana is the first project to be backed up by the LDA. Now, the Director of Housing, Catherine Keenan, and current SEO, Helen Griffin, they saw an opportunity in working with the LDA when only others were seeing problems. Now, what role does the leadership in local government play in addressing housing affordability?
I think the role that local government plays is massive, because one of the things that has been quite interesting to us and that we've learned over the past 2 years since we commenced was that our job is to open up state land, to help state land and government land get delivered. The problem with that is there's not that much state land really lying around unused, ready to be developed. Either it's very long term, or in locations that you don't really need, or there's a hospital on it, or there's an army barracks or something. So it's quite difficult to move those things along, and they're legitimate uses. So it is quite difficult. But then when you look at the municipalities and the local authorities, they have land for development, for housing. And you're right, you and Dún Laoghaire backed us way back in late 2018 with Shangana. And, since then, originally we asked ourselves, okay, well, what is the LDA and what is the local authority, and where do we overlap? And we've worked out that, you know, there's not that much overlap now, that we're quite complementary. And I think the way that local government can contribute towards affordable housing is as John O'Connor says, is through collaboration with people like the Housing Agency, the approved housing associations, and the Land Development Agency to get that land developed.
That's okay. So now we can have questions from all attendees. They will be managed by Brendan.
Thanks very much, Nuria, and thank you to the two Johns. I think some really, really interesting points there, and lots of data to work on actually for us to compare based here in Spain. I think the first thing to say to John Coleman is it's very cold in Madrid sometimes, especially a couple of weeks ago. So insulation is an issue we have here, especially with the type of building materials that exist in the Spanish stock. I think there's been a few questions in the chat that John O'Connor's may have already answered, but I'd like to bring forward again for people to have a chance to hear it. So I think one of the questions that we had was related to the fact that it's been mentioned, the density. So I think this goes to you, John Coleman, and perhaps maybe John O'Connor, is around the density. I think it's one of the questions here is, how do we change the perception in Ireland of living in flats, which of course is bog standard here in Spain. So John Coleman first, would you like to comment on that?
Well, you've really identified a problem, Brendan, that's for sure. So we do have a perception issue with flats or apartments that are somehow seen as lesser or less desirable forms of accommodation. So I think that the way we can best address that and to best deal with that is actually through services and amenity. Also through walkable neighborhoods, that people don't have big commutes to get to where they need to get to. So I think there's nothing wrong with a house if you want it, as long as you're willing to pay for it, and it shouldn't be in a city centre. Or anywhere near the built footprint. So I think we have to be focusing on density, obviously, within our cities. And then I think if you have that situation emerging where the only way to get close to your place of employment or to services is by living in denser forms of accommodation like apartments, I think people will see the benefits of that in comparison to living much further out, where you can have a less dense form of living. So look, it's a longer term thing, Brendan. I don't think it's something that we're going to solve here overnight by any means, but planning policy in Ireland is firmly pointed towards that. And I think by showing people the benefits of more dense styles of living with amenities is the way forward to try and change minds.
So kind of going on that concept. Sorry, go ahead, John.
I might jump in there, Brendan. I think in Ireland, I think we can learn from Spain and other countries where they have, very vibrant towns and cities, which is created by people, living, in the towns and cities. And there's a much longer tradition in terms of how to design apartments, how to design open spaces that we haven't got in Ireland. We focus on the buildings, but we're not very good, at public areas and the wider integration of everything together. We're terrible at actually zoning areas for residential development and not having enough mixed use. So I think we can learn from other countries. And just one other point, the 50%, actually 55% of all households in Ireland, probably the same in Spain, are 1 or 2 person households. So the model of houses and housing estates in Ireland will not create good places for people to live in the future. So we just need to learn how to do denser and better communities in Ireland.
And moving on from that point, I think you made there, John O'Connor, about the fact that the amenities are there and the land is zoned for residential. One of the questions that came in, I think it was from Paul, if I remember correctly, was talking about the model that happens here, and I think Nuria was commenting this before, in Spain, where land comes planned with services, so roads, lighting, and I think all of us who were here in 2013, 2012, 2014 remember flying into Madrid and just seeing these empty, what looked like empty car parks, but actually was land that had been prepped for development. Is that considered in Ireland, or is that a model that has been discussed maybe at a municipal level? Have you seen that happening, or is that something that is foreign at the moment?
I think it's something we do need to do. Ironically, we did it in the past, going back 40, 50 years ago, where local authorities put in the infrastructure and then the housing came after. And yeah, a lot of countries like Spain, the Netherlands, many countries, the local authorities and municipalities put in the roads and services, and then development comes after that. And it is a much better way of doing it. And it facilitates having a lot of builders and developers and all sorts of organizations, local authorities, approved housing bodies building. And I think that is something we need to get back to in Ireland. Something we need to do.
And John Coleman, coming back to you, because there was a comment there which actually is quite related to what you were mentioning, that you view the LDA as a potential opportunity to explore new approaches to construction, including offsite and modular building. How is that vision? Is that something that's concrete, or is that something that you'd like to see happen? And I think the question, to be more specific, is actually more about, is there a broader strategy happening within the Irish construction industry to move to those more efficient models of production, or is it still very much breeze blocks and cement?
Yeah, I think it's a like the approach is a bit more piecemeal. You obviously have panelized construction and so on, but in terms of the kind of wider house building industry focusing on more efficient ways, I think it's emerging. I think it's happening. You have to remember the house building industry in Ireland is very fragmented up until quite recently, up to 4 or 5 years ago. So if you look at and I think it's quite similar to the UK, and there was a statistic in the UK that pre-financial crisis, something like 2/3 of the houses were built. 1/3 of or 2/3 of the houses were built by kind of smaller SME type builders, whereas now 2/3 of homes are built by the large, big PLC type developers. There's not quite to the same extent in Ireland, but a similar trend has happened. So you've got a couple of larger scale developers doing quite a big chunk of housing output in the country. The point of me making that is that these are the type of people that can justify having their supply chain such that they can deploy modern methods of construction. Consistency of design is a big part of that as well. And when you've got the throughput of the scale that they do, which is large in an Irish context, I think that's an opportunity. But I think for the LDA, where we would see ourselves at a similar scale in the coming years, it's also an opportunity and possibly to push the envelope a bit harder, where we're not focused on bottom line issues like IRR and things like that. We're focused on the wider benefit, societal benefit of the country. So I think part of that will be to foster innovation. And while we don't have a totally consistent approach at the moment, which has been mainly around getting sites up and running first, I think as we move forward and particularly open the larger scale opportunities, that we will bring in some level of standardized design to foster innovation in our output as well.
I imagine you could say you're sitting on the biggest test bed in Ireland. Is really what you have there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Look, we're custodians of state assets, state money as well. So look, we have to watch the purse strings. There's no question. But I think we do have a mandate to innovate and to try and bring wider benefits into the way homes are produced in the country. So that's something that we're quite keen to pay attention to in the coming years.
Thank you. I'm going to go into a bit more of the, I'm not going to say controversial, but I am going to say controversial questions here, a bit more challenging. I think was from Joe Haslam, who's based here at Abai University. So one of the questions was about the housing assistance payment. So supporting the private rental market, well, supporting people getting into the private rental market. How, I think it goes to you, John O'Connor, how have you found that on balance? Has that been to the benefit of our society?
Firstly, in terms of households, it has supported a lot of households avail of housing support and have homes to live in, good quality homes to live in, and has facilitated people to get back to work. In terms of the previous scheme, which is under what's called SWA, social welfare support, you weren't permitted to go back to work, or you lost your accommodation. So it does facilitate that. So it has worked well for households. It is a significant cost to the taxpayer. So over time, we do need to provide more local authority housing, more housing by the housing associations, and less reliance on the housing assistance payment. But it has, for the households themselves, it has been effective, although it does cost the taxpayer.
Thanks very much, John. I think that's a great answer. And I think one of the other points that we were looking at that are coming through in some of the questions is to go back to the COVID concept. And I think we're going back as well to the apartment living. And if I may paraphrase or put words in your mouth, John Coleman, the 15-minute city concept, or the donut city concept, where you have everything within your reach, which I think we're quite successfully trying to achieve here in Barcelona as one of the pioneering of this concept. But as we've seen happen in London, and we've seen happen in lots of other large urban centres which have a high cost of living, remote working presents obviously an opportunity for regional hubs. I'm thinking of, in Ireland, we have places like Skibbereen, or we have centres like Westport that are able to offer perhaps a lower cost of living, yet maintain high internet speeds to support remote working. Do you think that is a short-term trend, or will that affect the housing market in Ireland and thus the affordability around the urban centres? Do you know if John Coleman, you want to add that in there?
Yeah, look, it's a question everyone's asking, Brendan. It's funny. We see policy emerging even in Ireland, that the government is working on policy to require that people have the option to now work from home for a certain period of time. So policy is kind of taking advantage and catching up with, and trying to make the most of the situation that we have, which is undeniably horrendously negative. But there are aspects of it that make you think, well, why is it that we all used to go to the same place at the same time to do something that we could do where we already were? And that people are asking that question. And so it's funny, some of my colleagues in some of the government agencies that would be very central to planning policy in the country, when that news came out, I was texting them and saying, well, what does this mean? Are we still focused on our 5 cities, or are we all happy to live anywhere and everywhere at the moment going forward? And look, I think the core idea of hubs, of congregation, of more dense living, I think is going to prevail. I don't think that's going to change, is my view. What it might mean is that we might be able to have more of them, for them not to be as centralized, say in Ireland's case, the top 4 or 5 cities, for the lower down, more towns to become more prominent, and still provide those neighborhoods that you mentioned, those walkable neighborhoods almost, that you can get everything within a 5 to 10 minute journey, but to have more of them. I think that's certainly going to be more feasible. I wouldn't rush to overstate it, but it is definitely going to change things. But I think the idea of denser living, I don't think we're going to move away from that.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think there's a big question. I think there's a big push, especially within European circles, of course, for that enablement without having the negative side effects on it. Before we continue our questions, I'd just like to invite the ambassador just to see if you would like to ask any particular questions.
No, I mean, I was listening with great interest and the issues there that Brendan was teasing out on the density and that, you know, societal approach to apartments and what can be done about that. But I think in the follow-up questions we've addressed it. And I was also interested as a civil servant in that whole piece about, you know, that skill sets in the different local authorities. I was thinking in a Spanish context, you know, a much bigger country, but again, a very devolved authorities. And I was just thinking about that, those skill sets and how do you move them from local authority to local authority. But no, I can see other questions in the chat box. I'm happy, Brendan, go for it.
No problem.
Very interesting, thank you.
Just checking in then. Perfect. I have another question here from Joe Haslam again, which is about this concept of users or losers approach to planning. Do we think that's going to see the light of day within the Irish context, or is this something that happens in other jurisdictions? Has this been seen to be successfully applied, in your opinion, in other countries? John O'Connor, would you have to? I'm trying not to pin all the policy ones on you, unfortunately, but I'll ask you to answer this one.
In terms of whether that legislation will come in, I don't know. One thing that we do have, which is a levy on land, you know, that isn't being zoned for residential and not being used, and I think that's been very successful in a lot of countries. I don't think we've got to a situation in Ireland yet that it's having a sufficient effect, and maybe we need to readjust things and ensure that it's applied in a consistent way across the country. But I wouldn't necessarily be in favour of a use or lose it, but I would be in favour of an effective tax on land that isn't being properly utilised, and a proper tax. Currently in Ireland, one of the issues is that if you have a debt on the land, so if you borrow to buy land and you're not utilising it, you often don't have to pay any levy. And I think kind of even a small effective levy could be very good, and I think it's been found to be very effective in other countries. Use it or lose it, I don't know.
I might make an observation there as well, Brendan, just following on from what John says. I'd be kind of a little bit skeptical myself. Like, we've looked at this quite a bit with the Department of Housing, and ultimately with the use it or lose it, you know, ultimately you want the place to be built out. You want homes to be developed. So if you withdraw planning permissions, planning consents, okay, it punishes the landowner, but ultimately it's not going to get developed. But I think really what we're talking about there is a system of incentives and disincentives, of carrots and of sticks, to encourage development within certain areas. So if you draw a line around certain areas, and I mentioned strategic development zones that we have, which is essentially a planning scheme for larger scale areas, similar to what I've outlined in Cork Docklands or Limerick train station. And the problem with that was, it was a good idea, it still is a good idea, but the problem is things like individual landowner insolvencies, other things like landowners looking at each other for 10 years wondering who pays for infrastructure and who's going to put it down. Those are blockages, and I think what we would need is to divide that system of incentives and disincentives for good things to happen if you develop and get going, bad things to happen if you don't. And like John was saying, land value tax and others are perhaps ways to play a role in that.
Thank you both for a comprehensive answer. Actually, I think it's quite interesting to bring in those points. And as you say, I think I'm finding it very difficult, by the way, that you're both called John. I think John Comedy brought in the fact of the carrot and stick model and finding that balance between it. And I think it calls back to, as we spoke before, about the difference between Spain and Ireland, where Spain actually has the infrastructure already plugged in by the local authority, and that's not a question. There's two questions that I'd like to roll into one here. So there's been an ambitious target set out here to provide affordable housing across Ireland. And whether it's between the housing agency or between the land development agency, the question that we have is, first of all, how do we think that will be reached? How can we ensure that that is reached successfully with quality in mind? And the second part is, how is it envisaged that the maintenance after construction continues within these developments in the long term? Because we're building houses not to 2030, we're building houses to last 100 years, surely.
I might
take that first, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. Very generous of you. Another tricky one. Yeah, like I think the quality, how do you do it well, I think there's probably three elements to the question there: quality, scale, and maintenance. And I think the first and the third, so quality and maintenance are probably linked, aren't they? So, when we're looking at the specification of what we design, it's obviously got to be robust. It's got to stand the test of time. You don't want to be replacing windows every 5 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to ensure that it's designed to a high quality. But what I mean by high quality is, of course, quality accommodation for households, but also to ensure that you're not going to be killed by maintenance costs on an ongoing basis. And that's especially important for cost rental, where it's envisaged that, be it the local authorities, be it the land development agency, be it the housing associations, are going to hold, essentially government funded parties are going to hold and operate these homes over the long term. So I think maintenance is key, but what may assist with maintenance, I think, is an inbuilt positivity in the cost rental model, which is where the costs are set at a level to ensure that the properties are maintained, that they don't fall into disrepair. And there are other tenures that don't provide for that have to be centrally funded, where the rents don't fund maintenance costs. So I think the quality maintenance piece is interlinked. On the scale, my personal view is that we do need to get to a scale that we need to. In Ireland, currently the only requirement on affordable housing on land. So there's a 10% social housing requirement, but there's the affordable housing requirement on land is really only on state land. So it's essentially, the LDA will be asked, give or take, to maximize affordable housing production on land that it accesses, or be it social or affordable. But the LDA is never going to be able to do it on its own. The housing associations individually can't do it on their own. Neither the local authorities, if you look at those as the main implementation vehicles. So I think what the challenge in the short term is to prove that the model works, to show that it can work, to get a level of scale of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 homes, or whatever the level is for Ireland, to say, look, we've showed you it works. It's a track record. It's been operating for 3 or 4 or 5 years now. This can work, and perhaps attract investment. That's one way. And then I think if you can show that it works, the government will have real policy options to be able to look at land and say, well, why don't we, like if you go to the UK, you want to develop land in London, you'll have to produce 30 or 40% affordable housing on it. So I think that will give real policy options to Ireland if we can develop this sector in the near term. And then I would be optimistic that it can mushroom once we prove the next 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Just add just 2 points to it. In terms on the quality side, critical getting the quality right. But I would say, particularly in Ireland, sometimes we need to do simpler, high quality design. So other countries like Spain and quite a number of countries, they do simple buildings, simple rectangular buildings, concentrate on the public spaces, where we often over-design our buildings and not necessarily get a good result. And the other big area is maintenance. On the Enniskerry Road, in terms of rents on Enniskerry Road, over time, 50% of the rents are caused by a result of the management and maintenance, and sinking fund costs. And we need to be a lot better at designing buildings that are lower costs in maintenance. Is something that we're not good at. Maybe one of the reasons why haven't been good at that, if the focus has always been on to sell apartments, for instance, that the developer, the builder, hasn't got any interest in the long-term maintenance costs. Mm. Whereas if you're building to rent, you do have to be worried about the maintenance costs. So both quality and maintenance are critical.
I think I could say it's like the Ryanair airplane seat model. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but everyone was wondering why Ryanair was putting leather seats in their planes when they're supposed to be the low-cost carrier. But actually, it was the point that maintenance over the lifetime of the plane was much cheaper, even though the upfront cost was a bit more expensive. Very good. I think there's a couple more questions, but I think one of the points is one of the questions, if I may twist some of the wording, if you permit me, Stephen, is related to the relationship between local developers and the mortgage market. So the price at which the houses can be built for versus what the actual buyer can achieve. Do we see it as purely a question of cost of construction, or does the mortgage accessibility for buyers also impact the market and therefore impact what the developers are able to actually achieve?
I'd make a couple of points in terms of in Ireland. We have more macro-prudential rules. I'm not sure what the situation is in Spain, so that a household can't borrow more than 3.5 times their income in terms of taking out a mortgage. And I think that has been good in terms of limiting what somebody can pay for a house or property, and that has helped to keep house prices down a bit, in terms of, and make sure that we didn't have the kind of rampant inflation that we had back 15, 20 years ago. So I think that's important. However, we do need to look, very seriously, as John said earlier, at the cost of construction in Ireland. It's just simply too high, and it's not just purely the cost of construction. It's about how we go about development. That example of building the roads and services beforehand could make a major difference because it gives a lot of certainty. And once you get certainty, is one way you can reduce costs. And then lots of parts of the system maybe where everybody is trying to make both make out of the system. So we do need to bring down the cost of delivery in Ireland somehow or other.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you both very much for weathering the questions from our audience, and thank you very much to the audience for providing such detailed questions and also such a nice flow. I can tell you there's a lot of Zoom fatigue going on out there, and it's not we often end up without questions sometimes, so it was great not to have to pretend there were questions. There definitely were lots. So without anything else from my side, I'd like to hand back over to you, Nuria.
Thank you. Well, we are at the end, so I would like to thank our speakers for their interesting presentations and discussions today. I hope that our attendees enjoyed the session as much as I did. But before we close, I would like to now hand over to the SIBN President, Elizabeth Aston, to close this virtual event. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Nuria. Hello, everybody. I've got to say, I've been absolutely fascinated. I'm no housing expert, but I have been both a renter and a homeowner on several occasions during my life. And I certainly feel like I've learned a lot this evening. I want to just say a very few words, a couple of minutes, just to really frame this highly interesting and topical event. And it's encouraging to see, as was mentioned by our ambassador at the beginning of this event, that the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are being addressed in such a tangible and practical way. And that's been for me really one of the best learnings of this evening. And also that there's such great collaboration across the various stakeholders to realize this ambition. That's also very encouraging indeed. I want to say a few thank yous. First of all, to our ambassador, Sheila Maguire, for opening the event this evening. You're always so gracious and supportive of SIBN, Sheila, and we're really very lucky indeed to have you with us again this evening. And you've collaborated just about every event we've done, so thank you for that. Secondly, an enormous thank you to our two wonderful guest speakers, John O'Connor of the Housing Agency and John Coleman of the Land Development Agency. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. It's been a very stimulating and insightful discussion about a topic that clearly impacts so many people's lives and will do in the near future. And it's also, I think it's really great that Nuria managed to bring you into this discussion for us. You know, it's good to hear that there's concrete plans for affordable housing back in our home country. Many of us are away from home for a very long time. I see by the Q&A in the panel, we've got many long-term SIBN people here tonight, but everybody stays very much in touch with what's happening home. We all have family and friends back there, and an extreme interest in what's happening in Ireland. And it's great to see that you're also planning to use some of the old famous landmarks, I think, and reinvigorate them for future purpose. And it'll be nice to see where that does happen, that probably build a great sense of community in those housing developments for the future. I was also particularly pleased on a personal note that you're not going to forget Waterford, which is my home county. It often gets forgotten, it seems, so it's great to see that you've got plans there as well. So that's my second round of thank yous. And then Nuria, what can I say? I have to say you've done an amazing job.
Thank you.
Planning, organizing and moderating the event. We all know that last year was a very complicated year for everybody, both on the personal and professional front. And many, many things were delayed or just didn't happen and won't happen. We were a newly elected SIBN committee just before the pandemic hit. Literally, I think we were in the job a couple of months. And we were very, very lucky that Nuria found us, or we found Nuria. I don't remember quite how it happened, but she came into the SIBN as a newcomer. She came directly onto our committee as Vice President. And I've got to say that we were very, very blessed that that happened, because you've been just so wonderful to work with these last 12, 15 months, actually. So thank you, Nuria.
Thank you.
And we've also learned a lot about you, because we actually didn't know, I think, that you were such a rock star on the housing front. And we've missed all those beers and dinners and lunches that we might have had in the last almost 12 months to find out all those things. So really good to hear about all the great work you were doing in Ireland and now back in Spain. And hopefully there can be more synergy between our two countries as it relates to housing. And then finally, I'll just come back to the sort of events. So in the autumn, we kicked off our series of SIBN virtual events in the absence, clearly, of being able to do any real presential one. And this is now our third, it's our third business type of event. We've also had a few fun things, but when it comes to business, it's our third event. We have many more in the pipeline, so watch this space. As always, thanks to our SIBN Secretary, Brendan Rowan, who's currently not on screen, but you've seen him earlier with the Q&A. He always does a great job managing our Q&A, but also doing a lot of the logistics behind the scenes. So thank you, Brendan. Hopefully you're hearing me. And also Martha, who's not visible, but Martha is our external comms person who does a lot of the plan, you know, the communications to make sure we get everybody online. So thank you, Martha, if you're here with us tonight. And that's about it. I just wanted to say a few thank yous to all of you, because you just created a great space this evening for something that's really important. So Nuria, I'll hand back.
Thank you.
Wrap up.
No, I just want to say thank you to you as well, Elizabeth, for organizing all the previous event and helping us to lead these new events. As you said, we have a series of events planned for this year as well. So please visit our website and we will continue to do this work. And thank you all for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.